All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cultish, Entering the Kingdom of the Cults. My name is Jeremiah Roberts. I am one of the co-hosts here. I'm here with Andrew, the super sleuth of the show. Good to see you here. You've been spending the whole week sleuthing around in Salt Lake City, Utah. We are currently in South Jordan, Utah.
Yeah.
I had a great time doing a live Q&A. That was really great. We are also here with Brother Wade. A lot of you have seen him before. And obviously, we're always super excited, and this is kind of unique. This is a little change of scenery, and I feel in many ways this is a lot more embedded, really, in the cultish infrastructure of Salt Lake City, Utah, and just the Utah area in general. And so we're here with Jared Fawcett, and how are you doing, man?
Doing good.
Good, man. So we just want to kind of just really hear your story. When we talked a little bit when you were here back, it was a couple months ago. We were out there. Were some things going on within Abortion Now, and you were out there. And there's a lot that you've been involved here in the Utah area in regards to that. But yeah, you just told me just a little bit about your story growing up in the Mormon Church, and I just knew enough to say, all right, I think there's a lot of things that we could talk about that's unique that'd just be a great conversation. So yeah, man. So maybe just start from the beginning, like just talk about your young years in the LDS Church. I think it's different for every single person, and yeah, I think it's just always unique to kind of hear the insider vantage point of what that was like. And it was in the Salt Lake area, right?
No, it was actually in the Idaho area, but you might as well call it the same thing. Pretty much eastern Idaho coming down to Utah is the same demographic. There is no southeastern Idaho. It's just an extension of Utah as far as the demographic goes.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what they call the Mormon Bubble. Is what the insiders call it. It's the Mormon Bubble. And so it's because you have majority LDS, so that's you're insulated from the world. Right. So to speak. So I was actually adopted into my family. I was adopted as a baby. I was born in Wyoming, and their friend who was a doctor over there found me, and they had 3 kids before me naturally, and then I was adopted into their family. And I was, LDS that whole time. I was born that way, raised that way, sealed right from the beginning. They like to say I was sealed in the temple to my bottle, I guess, because I was crying the whole time. Maybe that was a sign of things to come, but but I had to have the bottle at the altar, or else I wouldn't be quiet for the ceremony. So grew up LDS and my dad was usually in the bishopric or helping out with like leadership roles. So I grew up very much in there. I was very devout. It's interesting seeing the postmodern, and I know that you guys have done episodes on the postmodernism of Mormonism. Growing up back in the Mormon Bubble in the 80s and the 90s, we were very much like Orthodox. Yeah. Like we would never want to be called Christian. We were Mormons. They were apostates. Yeah. We were the restored faith.
Right.
It was that element that was there growing up. And so I was the kid who was actually going to elementary school, and I would bring my quad with me.
Wow.
To evangelize to my classmates and be like, hey, you got to be Mormon. Like, this is what this is.
Wow.
I'm also just impressed because that thing is heavy.
That's why you're so ripped. You've been flexing since quad.
You're already prepping yourself for all your dead weight lifting.
Yeah, you know.
Which is funny just too because Jeff Durbin always jokes that the reason why he has back problems now, he gives credit to all the books that he had put in his backpack before we could carry everything on our phone. Right. And what's interesting too is that you and I are roughly the same age. And so when it comes to the aspect of postmodern Mormonism, like I remember we were talking about that downstairs in our Q&A, that back then, like 20 something years ago, my classmates, they knew what they believed, and they were willing to go to bat for it. And like we all had we were on the same page that we're not on the same page. And whoa, what a strange trip it has been since then.
Yeah.
You're lucky to find one that it does deal with absolute standards. It's always a very unique situation.
And that's what I had growing up. So I actually had it and but I did grow up in it, and it was a fairly conditional environment I grew up in. So meaning if you were following the standards and you were doing those things that you should be doing, there was a lot more privileges that you were given in the house versus
Interesting.
if you weren't
Reward.
doing those things, it was not just an internal reward, it was very temporal
Yeah.
as well. And it was interesting growing up with them, like my older siblings in that family were all natural. So growing up, I also heard a lot like, well, why aren't you like your siblings? You know, I mean, and when I got to be a teenager, and being as teenagers were, I'd be like, I don't know, genetics, you know, but it was very much that way. And then as I was growing up, like I said, I was very devout, went to seminary, did those things, except for there was a period in my life when I was about 15, 16, where as rebellions happen when you're 15, 16, I went pretty much like militant atheist.
Okay.
And there,
What made you go militant atheist, though?
a lot of my friends, I had a lot of friends who weren't members or who were struggling. And they just showed it. When that happened, I had gotten into a lot of like more like horror movies, like that kind of world, which really wasn't accepted around like the bubble.
Yeah,
like
especially
LDS
among
people.
the conservative.
Right.
And so like the people who were accepting me in were more of like I got around like the occult, like witchcraft, like that group because they accepted me
Okay.
into their group.
I was like wondering, were they telling you things about Joseph Smith? Were they telling you things about the Mormon Church? Or was it you just didn't like the culture?
I didn't like the culture. It was a strictly culture thing.
Gotcha.
And the reason why I can say that is because I ended up like once I had a really like interesting experience during that period where I got to kind of see the other side up close and personal.
Tell us.
So, and I don't know like if I was dreaming at this point or if it happened.
Yeah.
I'll be upfront and honest.
Yeah. All right.
But one night I was sleeping and I got like at that time when I was 15, 16 is when Marilyn Manson got huge.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I was a really big fan at that point and like following and like I was
I
part of the...
I had a lot of my Mormon classmates who were big Marilyn Manson fans.
Really?
So, yeah.
So
Interesting.
I got really into it. One night I was listening to... I would go to sleep listening to it. Like I was that level where I could sleep to it.
Wow, Jared.
And one night, like I was doing that, and like all of a sudden I woke up and I could swear I could hear something behind the music, and like I could feel something in the room with me, and it was a big eye opener to the point where I was like, okay, well, if that's real, then that has to be real. Like it kind of shook you out of your atheism really quick.
Okay.
When you get to see the other side up close and personal, it's like,
Okay.
oh, okay, wait, hold on.
Yeah.
So did it shake you back into the
LDS Church, yeah.
Okay.
Shook me right back in.
So if there's a demonic or spiritual realm, then there is a God.
Yeah.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, we had an episode a while back with Stephen Bancroft. We were sort of describing even now the New Age movement now as sort of like the new atheism, where you get to kind of be spiritual without really having to...
A moral code.
Yeah, a moral code. You get to be spiritual yet be autonomous. So
Right.
it's kind of like you get to have your cake and eat it too. And I'm just curious, just backtracking prior to you becoming militant atheist and kind of growing up in the Mormon Church, was there a moment kind of where you sort of owned it for a little bit?
Oh.
It became your own thing? Because I know at a very young age, at 12, usually 12 years old, it's when you're ordained with the...
I got the priesthood when I was 12.
Priesthood, yeah.
Yep, I got the priesthood when I was 12. I was the Deacons Quorum's president, actually. And I was the teacher quorum president as well. So even though they won't say that leadership runs within families, I can say just from the inside, yeah, it does. You can see like certain families are like, this is where the stake presidents are, this is where the bishops are, this is where like even their kids are the leaders of wherever they're called to be in.
Right.
And so that's what I experienced. I was the deacons quorum. I was in the presidencies. I was constantly doing those things. Yeah, I owned it. I was totally in. I mean, there were times when I would question things, but I would, whatever was given to me as the answer. And back then they would actually give you answers. They would use doctrine and be like, look,
Yeah.
instead of, well, we don't know. Maybe you should. And they obscure the point. No, back then they'd be like, well, this is what you are. Oh, okay.
Right.
All right. So that's, and I would buy into it because I grew up with it. This is what I knew.
All right.
So if I was looking for God, that was God.
Right. So you had this. All right. So that makes sense then. So you become militant atheist. You get into Marilyn Manson.
Yeah.
You have this scare. This of really what in many ways could have been an encounter with the unseen realm, just because again there's a biblical basis for it. Because if you just know the things that Marilyn Manson was involved in, he was tapped into things and was doing things that would cross over the other side in ways that God says this is a no-fly zone.
Yeah.
Do not fly over here, because what comes out the other side of what you open up is incredibly spiritually dangerous.
Yeah, regardless if it was a dream or you were actually conscious, we know the unseen realm can affect people in both ways.
Yeah.
So
I just don't know either way. And where I was in the room alone, I don't want to say one way or the other.
No.
Because
sure.
I'm like, I don't know.
It sounds totally possible.
And so that happened. It shook me back in. And I finished. And I was still going to seminary at that point because that's what was expected, even when I was like that with religion. And the seminary teachers used to call my parents in because I would do things like change some of the hymns to Hellfire and Brimstone and whatever.
Yeah. Some of the Mormon hymns?
And cause issues.
Do you remember some of the hymns that
Well,
you changed?
a lot of those hymns actually, they're actually stolen from Christianity, which makes me feel even worse now.
Right.
I heard the voice of Jesus say, which is Kingsfold, is actually the tune that they use for If I Could Hide a Kolob. It's the same song.
Yeah.
Wow.
Huh.
And hearing the actual one now is so much more than I ever thought it could be.
Yeah.
Versus the other one. But knowing like I changed songs like that, and I'm going...
Because the only two songs I really know was... it was interesting too because we watched Murder Among the Mormons, right? And so we thank thee, O God, for a prophet, right? And then also I remember one time when I was going to the Mormon school that I was going to, I started already. It's great. All of a sudden we had this one like small little closet that had a piano inside of it, and so it was just like how they fit that piano inside of this closet. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. And so I remember just walking past there. I was like there. I think I was there for the one time I actually got detention. I don't remember what it was for, but I'm walking by and I hear this piano going, and all of a sudden I hear this girl go, "I know my Mormon boy, he is my pride and joy," and they're singing the song, "Oh how I love my Mormon boy." And are you familiar with this?
Yeah, they actually, that's a song that they teach them at girls' camp.
Yeah, and of course I just remember hearing that where it's like, one day I'll be his wife, we'll have eternal life. And I'm like, what?
Well, that's because in their theology, when you want to reach the third level of the celestial kingdom, because even though there's three kingdoms, the top one has a third one. Their third level. So the first level of celestial kingdom is if you get baptized and you're a member. Mm-hmm. Second level is you go through the temple and go through that. The third level is you have to get married, and the only way an LDS woman can get in there is if her husband brings her in.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So and that's why they get married young, usually within the culture and everything like that, is because of that wanting to be saved and wanting that surety of it.
And he has to call her name, right?
He has to call her name.
Right.
By her new name.
Her new name. Yeah.
Which is just interesting because I try and actually bring that if ever I've ended up in an encounter with Mormon women or sister missionaries, I look for an opportunity to hopefully bring that up. And it's always interesting to see their reply.
Most of them will deny it now.
Yeah.
Or they don't really realize what they're doing. It's just something that they do. Mm-hmm. And it's because they don't really own their theology. I like to bring up when I'm doing street evangelism, what helps me with that is I bring up my past with them to usually cut through that. I'm like, look, I was Mormon for over 30 years. I had 2 state callings when I resigned. I taught gospel principles. I taught theology. Mm-hmm. There's nothing I went through. I was married in the temple. I went on a mission. I've done all these things. I know what you believe. So let's cut through that first and foremost. and now let's have a conversation. And usually it's a better conversation because I don't get well, you're making that up. They're like, oh yeah, no, he knows. Yeah. And usually they don't. Usually, if I call a Mormon too, they don't go, "We're not." They're like, "Oh yeah, we're Mormon."
Right.
Yeah, whatever.
Right. So
you caught me.
Right. So we're at the part where you're mentioning 30 years in the Mormon Church, and so you're back there. You're kind of messing around with some of the hymns.
So yeah, I'm messing around. I'm doing stuff I shouldn't do. And I've seen a lot of the witchcraft stuff, which will play in a little bit later too. But anyway, I ended up going back. I actually had a ceremony where I destroyed all of the tapes that I was listening to with a baseball bat. It was a thing.
Epic.
Wow.
Like the Marilyn Manson tapes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I destroyed them.
Which is just something that's happened too. Like kids go to a summer camp and they can't hide. My brother did it. He came back and I think he destroyed his Creed CDs and
Creed?
Yeah.
That's sad. Creed's Christian.
Oh,
okay. At least I had the credit of breaking Marilyn Manson and
yeah.
And it was Black Sabbath was the other one that I was really into.
Yeah.
At least Black Sabbath and Marilyn Manson, not Creed.
Smashing my NSYNC tape. Anyway.
But so I did that, and then I really was like, hey, I'm gonna get because after seeing that realm, I'm like, I'm really gonna get deep in and own this.
You're gung ho now.
I'm in.
To war.
I'm going to war. And I had a really, a girl at that point too, who I was really strong with, who I ended up breaking off with too. Cause it was in that whole scene. I was about 16, like 15, 16.
Okay.
So, went gung ho in, really got into seminary, really started doing everything. And at that point too, my parents were very much hands off with me. Because my adopted parents, when I was really militant and going after him, my dad one day, because a lot of the Mormon church is all about taking personal accountability. You need to be self-sustaining. You need this. He basically told me, like, you're on your own. Like, you can live here. We'll feed you. But I'm not going to parent-teacher conferences anymore or anything. Like, if you're going to succeed, it's on you at this point.
Wow. And
I'm like, okay. So, but I went gung-ho in. Of course, they supported that. And ended up, becoming an elder when I was 18, which don't know how you become an elder when you're 18. No 18-year-old I know has enough wisdom to be an elder, but you're made an elder when I was 18. And then ended up actually not going to go on a mission to begin with. I actually prayed about it and was like, hey, should I go on a mission? And I kept getting a no. And that was a big source of contention in the house. Because I kept on telling them I'm getting a no. And they're like, you can't be getting a no. Because up where I was in Idaho and probably here in Utah, where most people get being like around 18, or 19, at the time it was 19 was the mission age. Now it's 18, but it was 19 then. You wouldn't get peer pressure to drink or do drugs. It was peer pressure to go on a mission.
Right.
Like everybody goes on missions. I was liking to point out at that point, because I've always been a logical person and like arguing and stuff that way. I always used to like to point out that Gordon B. Hinckley said should. Every worthy young man should go on a mission. I'm like, should. That means ought to, not necessarily will. Yeah. That's what I used to tell my parents, like, ought to. That doesn't mean, it's not a commandment. Yeah. It's not, you will. It was should.
Right.
But I ended up eventually deciding to go that route, put in my papers, and ended up getting a call, which, knowing what I know now, showed the lack of discernment.
Where did you get sent to?
Rapid City, South Dakota mission is where I got called. But Rapid City, South Dakota covers a lot, because there's more cows up there than people.
Right.
So it's North and South Dakota, half of Minnesota, part of Iowa, and part of Wyoming.
Wow, you went all over the place.
So I actually ended up not making it to the mission field. So that's another story. So I went to the Missionary Training Center, and this is where I do suffer from anxiety disorders. This is where I had my first anxiety break.
Wow, okay.
So,
at the training center.
At the training center. Mm-hmm. So that was probably why I was getting a no. I'd like to think that, like my joke is that when I put in my papers, like all my guardian angels went, Okay, who told him yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought the answer was no.
Right.
Who said yes?
Now you mentioned, I'm just curious, anxiety break.
Yeah.
Like explain what that is and what that meant when
So
you were in the missionary training center.
So it was the first time that I was really ever on my own, away from family.
Yeah.
Had nobody. And it's not actually uncommon in the missionary training center.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are on their own. You're getting pressured, like hardcore pressured, because it's all about numbers. And they're giving you, like, you had to memorize, and this is when they actually had memorized discussions before they used the thing.
Preach my gospel.
Preach is pre that. You had 6 discussions, and you had to memorize them word for word.
Wow.
And they would bring in like people who would act like non-members, and you would role play. You had to knock on doors. You had to do phone calls. You like manned a phone
It's
bank.
a real training center.
Yeah, it. People are learning languages, and once if you're learning the language, you can't speak to anybody else outside of that because you have to be speaking the language the whole time to learn it.
Would it be almost like a boiler room mentality?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Of what you went through?
Yeah,
Mm.
and I broke. I ended up having panic attacks. I remember getting picked up by my parents from the missionary training center and shaking almost for a week, like just from all the adrenaline. And I was literally just like, and I couldn't stop.
Wow.
Man.
And I remember my only big worry at that point, when I talked to the psychologist at the missionary training center, was, am I getting an honorable discharge?
You were still worried.
I was
You were
worried.
still worried to hopefully appear in a good light,
Yeah.
despite not being able to fulfill
Yeah.
the calling. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, please, do I get an honorable
Yeah.
discharge?
Wow.
How did when you were having these anxiety attacks, like how did they respond to people in the missionary training center? Was it we need to really help deal with this person, or is this is just person that's just not a good fit for that, or how did they deal with that?
They actually wanted me to keep going.
Wow.
So they were trying to help me to keep going.
Hmm.
Which probably isn't the best idea, actually, in that situation. It's better to get them around people that they know, get them out of the situation. No, they were pressuring me to stay. That was the mentality.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Hmm.
it was very much that.
Okay.
Did you get an honorable discharge?
I did.
Okay.
When I went home, it was honorable even to the point of the stake president giving the normal speech, which is, well, now that you're done with the mission, now you need to find a wife.
Wow.
Okay.
I'm like 19.
Is that what you did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started going to a singles ward at that point. So.
And
Wait, they have singles wards?
Yeah, so in Idaho and Utah, I mean, not so much where there's not a big population. I imagine probably in Arizona they probably have them too.
There probably is.
But because I know in Gilbert especially, there's a lot.
Yeah.
But they have singles wards
I did
where
not know that.
you're
Wow.
it's from you once you turn 30 though, you can't go there. You're too old for the
It's
singles
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of singles ward, we visited a singles ward this couple days. Just the other day, we're at downtown Salt Lake Temple because there's no one down there except for young female missionaries. I also found that very peculiar as well too.
But yeah, it was a singles ward. I ended up going there, went to Institute. Music's always been a big thing. I actually joined the Institute choir at Idaho State. And it was actually taught by a former Mormon Tabernacle choir member. So
Wow.
it was kind of like a thing we would go around and sing for different wards and do those things. And got pretty involved in music and also swing club. I was the vice president of swing club at the time that I met my wife. We actually met at an Institute dance. And it was after some really bad relationships because the thing is where most people on the outside of the faith are pretty commitment phobic.
Right.
You got to understand that you just gave this 19-year-old or some 20-year-old whatever missionary who's sitting there with a bunch of hormones, like, go find a woman.
Right.
Okay. So you're not commitment phobic at all. You're like looking for a wife.
Yeah.
So I had some really bad relationships because of that. The first I had 3 really bad ones. And I met my wife at 20. So that should tell you, like,
You were looking.
I was looking. And like straight out soap opera stuff. Like the second one could have been a Days Were Lies episode. She had some eating disorder issues, which I was helping her through. She was in college. I wasn't. I was working. And she would use my computer, because this was back when computers weren't as prevalent, to do her homework and stuff. And her car broke down. So she actually used my car to go visit her brother at BYU, Idaho, which was Rick's college at the time. Ends up cheating on me with her roommate, her brother's roommate. And then comes back, doesn't tell me about it, uses my computer to email me that fact. Because she can't tell me in person.
Right.
After she's been using my car and my computer.
Yikes.
Like I said, drama. So that kind of sets up, because when I met my wife, it was at an institute dance that I was DJing with one of my friends. And he was interested in her friend, and I was kind of the wingman, so I helped that. Well, I found out that she was 17, because this is when high schoolers were allowed to go to the institute dance to get introduced to like the next step for them. And I was pretty scared to even like pursue anything at that point with her, because I'm like, she's too young, it's gonna be drama, I've dealt with enough at this point, I'm gonna take and so that I actually, our first date, I had one of my friends who was a girl, because it was a group date. I'm like, come and flirt with me the whole time, so she understands. And so she did. So our first date with my wife, now almost 18 years, was really great. No, she flirted with me the whole time, and the only reason that we're together is definitely my wife. She's a saint. It was pride on her part. She didn't want to tell her sister that she had a bad date, so she called me back up and set up a second date where it was just me and her. And then we got to know each other. We actually played board games with my mom. Welcome to Mormon World.
Was it Celestial Pursuit?
Yeah.
No, we played Sequence.
Okay.
Which we still don't play. We still don't play to this day, because I taught my wife how to play. Beat her once. Have never been able to beat her since.
Wow.
So the game tends to stay in the closet.
Got on the level playing.
Even though she's like, "Do you want to play?"
No,
I'm good.
I'm not really feeling this.
I'm good.
Right.
I'll lose again. And then we went and saw How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. That was our second date. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You guys know each other, and then we got married in the temple, the Idaho Falls Temple.
Yeah. Just real quickly, was there anything you had done? You had been in the temple before. You'd done temple work as a devout Mormon.
Before I went on my mission,
Right.
Before you go on your mission, you have to go and get your endowment.
Right. Yeah. For sure. I think, though, in all seriousness, and I'm just curious because many of folk who we have talked with who became ex-Mormon or began to have doubts ended up being when they're doing something or being involved at the temple, which in my opinion just always, there is a level of irony because they do talk it up like this is the most great and glorious work you can be part of. Mm-hmm. But that seems to be kind of sort of like that moment I call it the Morpheus holding up the Duracell battery moment.
It was really weird. I luckily had, luckily, unluckily, depending on how you look at it now, but my family had really kind of prepped me, and Institute actually had a temple prep class that they put you in before that kind of explained everything. So
you're not as
nothing to keep by surprise.
Weirded out.
Yeah, so it wasn't, a lot of people don't have the advantage. In the Mormon Bubble, you do. Outside of the Mormon Bubble, you really wouldn't have that advantage. You'd just be going and seeing everything for the first time. I had this class that was like, this is the symbolism, this is what's going on, this is why we're doing this is what's going, and it was like, okay. And then you get there, and even though some of it's weird, you have all your family. Like, when I went for my mission, my whole family was there. Mm-hmm. All my older siblings were there, my adopted parents were there, my grandparents were there, my aunts and uncles were there. They're all doing this. So I'm like, I'm doing this too, because this is what we do.
Right.
Yeah. I have a question for you. So you had that one experience with the falling asleep to listening to Marilyn Manson. So you had this experience, let's say, with the unseen realm.
Yeah.
Which scares you. So I'm guessing in the back of your mind, this thing you experienced must have always been there.
Oh yeah.
So
Hands
leading
down.
up to where you were now in the story, were there other experiences that you had, or was this just the one time it was gone? You're not focused on LDS doctrine, so you're not having any weird situations or anything happening, or?
So I had them more when I was in the singles ward, not at that point. I didn't really have anything terribly weird, except for that moment that kept replaying in the back of my head, like you said.
Kept replaying. Okay.
It would be right there. Like I'm like,
Interesting.
no, I'm doing the right thing because that's real. So it would constantly be there. But the only thing that really like shook me a little when I was in singles ward was when the Nauvoo temple got dedicated. And I noticed that one of the stained glass windows was a pentagram.
Okay.
And it has to do with my past because I was hanging around with a bunch of witchcraft goth kids.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you justify that in your mind then?
It took a while.
It took a while.
A lot of talks with my bishop, but he was just explaining to me like the 5 points, meaning like, because that's what saves us, being like the 5 points of the crucifixion and stuff like that. It was like the explanation was kind of out there,
Right.
Yeah.
but it worked well enough to be like, oh, okay, I can see it. Let's.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he was talking about how that was used as an ancient Christian symbol for a long time and then got stolen, basically, was his take
Okay.
by the pagans.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see. You'll see
That was always a Christian symbol.
No, Wade's actually wearing the comment just so we can boost our algorithm in YouTube comments so people can talk about that symbol. But anyways.
That I have to argue with people all the time.
Right? But in many ways, when you talk about the different symbols here in Utah, I mean, we were just, we drove by the state capitol, and right adjacent to the state capitol is a small little church that right outside has a pentagram there. And, you know, we were also just outside the Salt Lake Temple, which is currently being reconstructed, and there's just it's just a carnival of occult symbols. You've got the secret handshake symbol, you've got the all-seeing eye, you have inverted pentagrams everywhere. It's just a carnival of that.
There's that. There's actually, if you go to the history, I think it's the museum over here.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a pentagram up on that one.
Yes. Yeah. It's in like the stars or something like that.
And no, it's right there. It's like so there's like this like mural of all this stuff, and it's just right there in the corner.
Wow.
Interesting.
And if another thing was across from the Christus statue in the visitor center, like the Christus statue.
Yeah.
There's upside down stars with the bottom point being longer.
What?
On the wood. Yeah, I've taken pictures and looked at all of these things.
Interesting.
And I also find it interesting that on the earth, when he's called the light of the world, the earth, which is behind the Christus statue, actually has a big shadow on it. So it makes you think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the symbolism's there, and it kind of shook me. But I was like, well, but that things kept playing in the back of my head. I'm like, nope, I'm just falling back into old traps. Back when used to mess around with that kind of stuff, so I decided to move forward. When I got married, still the thing is, they didn't care. I still was like into horror movies and things, even at that point. Like I always kind of had that love, and I think a lot of it stemmed from my adoptive mom really liked them, and so it was kind of our thing. We'd watch them together. But a lot of the horror movies we watched, like we didn't watch like a lot of like your standard ones. Like my favorite horror movie, probably even still to this day, would be The Old House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price.
Right.
Like the black and white, like old school
Right.
thing. And she showed that to me.
Right. But that would be like the type of horror genre where it'd more rely on what you can't see, versus like the gore.
I mean, there were skeletons and stuff,
right.
but I mean, it was what you can't see and more.
Yeah,
it was
more like the psychological aspect. Yeah,
and so I was always into that world, and that kind of comes in because when I was married, I'd always had that stuff playing. We ended up having our first child really quickly. We were married for only like a year and a half. So my wife was 19 when she got pregnant. We used to like to tease her that she was a statistic she was a teen pregnancy even. She's like,
Yeah.
I'm married. We're like, still teen pregnancy. So my daughter Zoe was born, and I ended up really falling in love with Ghost Hunters, which was on Sci-Fi. Kind of comes from that horror world.
Yeah.
Well, and what a lot of people don't know is I can't remember which one. One of the TAPS team members, one of the top ones, he's actually LDS.
Right.
Interesting.
And so I found out they had a team that covered Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, and I joined that group
Of Ghost Hunters.
Of Ghost Hunters.
So can, just for the listeners too, they're probably thinking, they're like, well, this guy is in the LDS church. He's a hardcore member, but he's ghost hunting. How does that work?
So in their theology, it actually makes perfect sense. So when you die in the LDS world, you go to either spirit paradise or spirit prison based on how you acted here. Mm-hmm. Or mostly spirit prison can happen if you don't get like your ordinances done. But it's here.
Okay.
Spirit paradise and spirit prison are here.
On Earth.
On Earth. So it's an unseen thing, which that's why doing work for the dead and everything, a lot of people will have experiences if you talk to them in the temple, where in the temple they're like, well, my uncle and aunt were there when I was doing my work for them. When I was doing the work for them.
Wait. Their dead uncle and aunt were there?
Yeah.
Like they saw something?
Yeah, like they saw that.
That's normative. There's people I've talked to. In fact,
what in the world? That's terrifying.
And in fact, when I did baptisms for the dead, it was confirmed once. Like I felt something, and my adoptive mom was in the room when I was, because you do baptisms and you get confirmed for each person.
Right.
She said that she could hear an audible like yes when the confirmation was happening. But that would have been the person who was
baptized for or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wow. in their theology,
I've never heard this.
And so in their theology, it would make perfect sense to do ghost hunting or spirit hunting because they're there.
Because if they can get someone on the other side to tell you about spirit prison, then all of a sudden it confirms their testimony, confirms their theology. Mormonism can spread around the world, and all kinds of people get baptized for the same proxy. Wow.
It makes me wonder, though. So hopefully I'm not sidetracking too much, but
you're good.
Like, when do you progress to godhood and get your own planet and kingdom?
Sure.
Is that after the resurrection or something? Okay.
It's after the resurrection. And actually, in their theology, there's multiple resurrections too.
Okay.
The faithful will get called forward in the first resurrection, and then there's a second one. Everybody will be resurrected
in stages.
Worthiness. Yeah, and then but it's almost universal. They're almost universalism though, in a way.
Yeah.
Because the only way you can truly go to what we as Christians would call hell is if you had an actual witness and denied it. So the only really way to become a son of perdition is to actually physically see, like have the Spirit be like, here's Jesus. And then you go, I don't believe in it.
Or really, so in other words, that also would be applicable to ex-Mormons. Like those are the ones who would be eligible who would go to hell.
Not even them, right?
No.
Yeah.
Not even them.
That's what I've heard.
Rapists and stuff would go to the celestial kingdom. The lowest level.
What about like apostates in the sense that they are actively seeking to destroy the Mormon church in terms of preaching against them?
Well, I would think
missionaries will come down to where they're at and preach to them, and hopefully later they'll get out of where they're at, right?
And that's the thing is if you accept their theology in the afterlife, you actually get the terrestrial kingdom, which is the second one, where what they say is in that kingdom is where Jesus reigns, and you're basically like angels worshiping him for eternity. So my usual thing when I'm talking like on the street with an LDS person is I said, so hear me out. They're like, what? And I said, so I know your theology, I'm about to tell you mine. I said, but I'm in really good shape. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, so here's the deal. If you're right and I'm wrong, then you're going to do my work for me when I die. I guarantee you are. And if I'm staring at it in the face, there's no way I'm saying no. So I'll say yes. I'll end up in the terrestrial kingdom where I'll be worshiping Jesus for all eternity as an angel. And they're like, okay. And I said, so And if I'm right where I'm at right now, then that sounds a lot like my heaven. I'm like, but let me tell you the flip side on that. If I'm right and you're wrong, then I'm still in that heaven and you're in hell. I'm like, I have the better of the two situations.
Yeah.
Just from a logical standpoint.
For sure.
From a logical standpoint, I have the better of those two situations.
Dang.
Yeah, and it's unique too. I mean, in fact, James White has a story where he was back during the earlier heyday of Alpha and Omega Ministries, where he handed out a tract to someone. The guy does the classic, they take the tract, they grab it, imagine this phone as a tract, flips it around, they want to say, oh, wait, who's this from? Then he looks it back and looks at him and just says, go to hell. And this guy said that to James White, and James White says, well, sir, according to your theology, I can't. And the guy goes, oh, and he got he got flustered, and because he knew it was true. But it does make sense. But another serious story when it comes to the seriousness of it.
That's when. Yeah. To answer your question, that's when they. That's because when the resurrection happens is when the judgment happens, and then you get your kingdom of glory.
Okay.
But what's crazy about the celestial thing and there not being in hell is Joseph Smith is actually quoted as saying, if you could understand the glory of the celestial kingdom, which is that lowest level, you would be killing yourself to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the work that they do with the dead, and we were talking earlier about the verses, the scripture mastery cards, they'll memorize the verse in 1 Corinthians 15 about why they're not baptized for the dead. But in many ways, it does make sense, even having sort of those supernatural encounters. In many ways, it reinforces what they believe and what they're doing. James White has a unique story he's only told a couple of times, and hopefully I do it justice, but he somehow was it was himself, and maybe it was Rich Pierce or someone involved with Alpha and Omega Ministries at the time. They got invited over to this Mormon couple's house. They're going back and forth. They're going over different scripture verses. And apparently they could tell there's a girl, maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, who was in sort of upstairs and intently listening in. And finally she came down and she said, I just want to tell you something that I experienced. And I've heard you guys talking back and forth a whole lot. A young girl. And she said, well, I was being baptized for the dead. And while I was down there, I was being baptized and I saw a bunch of these angelic beings sort of elevated above the baptismal font. And as I got baptized, they would smile and they would float off. And that kept on happening. But all of a sudden, they brought me out of the baptismal font. There were two sort of spiritual beings and they looked sad. Like they had been missed, and she told the person who was directing the baptism, because they used to do a list because of the genealogies, and she said, I want to, no, you need to double check. And the person was sure, no, we covered all of them. She goes, no, double checked again. And sure enough, they had missed 2 slots, 2 names, and there are 2 spirit beings that they saw. So they went back to her, baptized her twice for those people. Those spirit beings left off. So what's interesting is she told this whole story to James and whoever was with him, and she just said, you can show me every false prophecy, you can show me anything that you want. I saw that, and I know the church is true. And she walked back upstairs. And I remember just James said it in such a way that it's still he's like, that stays with me to this day, just that sort of conversation. I bring that up to say that those experiences are there is an unseen realm. There is something that's going on there, and that's something we need to be able to embrace and not shy away from, because there is a precedent now as Christians to where we can explain and make sense of that.
Yeah. Well, and we know that even Satan can masquerade as an angel of light. So.
Right.
Yeah.
And why would he not be happy, or why would he not do something like that to fully convince somebody further? I mean,
Wow. So continue with your story now. Now we know that it's okay in the LDS.
No, it is perfectly okay. Nothing wrong with ghost hunting.
So you joined TAPS in a specific...
Yeah, I was an EVP tech. Yeah, and I was their EVP tech, which that is the person who handles what they call electric voice phenomenon, or the audio side of things. Yeah. And all we used with these little RCA recorders, people were like, well, did you have this high-tech equipment? No, we had the little RCA things that you record lectures on, so you don't have to take notes. And then we just hooked it up to a computer and listened to it, and that's usually where you would hear it. And I actually, one time, I can't tell you where it is because we sign agreements with places that the businesses can release it, but we can't release where we were. It was a restaurant, I can say that, but it was an older place up and so we're sitting around in Idaho in these areas where it's like Old West is what made this. So I was trying to figure out Age of Ghost. What's really interesting though is through doing the ghost hunting, 90% of what people think is paranormal can be explained.
Right.
I'll put that up
Interesting.
front.
Debunking.
You say 90%.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. We'd like walk in there like this door normally opens, and we'd walk, and you could all of a sudden feel a loose floorboard, and we'd be like, we'd stomp on it, and the door opens, and we're like, "You mean that?" And they're like, "Yeah, you need to fix your floor."
Right.
Like that's all it is. But yeah, I would say 90%.
Right.
But there was the occasional thing, and I got.
Wait, was this a hobby? Were you being paid?
It was a hobby.
So okay, you'd go to work and then you'd go do like a 3-day weekend.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Research, going to these sites.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, it's also just one of those things too when you think about even the aspect of like for people who are fortune tellers or mediums. There's a lot of people who are who would be sort of the sleight of hand con artist, David Copperfield sort of, David Blaine sort of thing going on. But then at the same time though, there are people who are really giving accurate information, and there's nothing in the physical realm that can explain why they have the knowledge of what they do. It's always good to differentiate between that, but there is that sort of 80-20 when it comes to that.
Yeah,
so, for sure.
Definitely. And and this one I got teased for the whole time I was with the group. So when you'd ask them questions, what a lot of people would do, that was a mistake when they'd ghost hunt, is they just rapid fire questions. The problem is you're not leaving any space for an answer. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that the taps would teach you is you ask a question, it leaves space for a response. You ask a question just as if I was talking. It's a natural flow. Mm-hmm. Well, I was trying to figure out age for this ghost. And so I asked, well, did you have a horse or did you have a car? Because this would tell me something. And then I said, and then left a space, nothing. And then I said, if you had a horse, what did you call it? Notice I said call it. I didn't say name it. Call it. Clear as day on the tape. After that, I called it a horse. And I got made fun of for the rest of the time. Because it was like, you could see the ghost sitting there going, what do you think I called it, a sheep?
Right.
I called it a horse.
So you laugh, I'd be terrified. I'm like,
yeah.
Well, at the time, I mean, now, to quote Joy, if you want, do you want demons? That's how you get demons.
Yeah.
But back then it was like, and the team teased me about it mercilessly. Why didn't you say name?
Did you ever have a terrifying experience while doing that?
A lot of it was terrifying. Looking back at it now, I didn't really realize it at the time, but I wasn't
because you're dabbling with demons ultimately. Yeah.
No screeches or scratches or anything like that.
Screeches, screams, no scratches. One time I felt really weird, but that was actually due to a non-paranormal event. Someone had built, it was an older house, and they hadn't shielded like hardly any of their wiring.
Oh, okay.
So EMP's real.
Yeah.
And I was like, you go down there and it was just like, I'm like, you're like, I really feel oppressed down there. I'm like, no, you're feeling electric pulses going through your body. You need to fix that.
Oh my
That's
goodness.
good.
That is awful.
That's good. Well, people are gonna be mad. I remember when we did the Exorcism of Kristen Bellamy, we kind of left it on the cliffhanger. Like, we're just starting to get to the good ghost hunting stuff. Yeah. But we're kind of around the 55-minute mark. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold off. We're gonna take a 5-minute break. Everyone else, unfortunately, is gonna have to wait a week. But we are going to just take a quick break. We'll jump right back. We'll kind of get into the real meat and potatoes of the ghost hunting and how that related to your time being in Mormonism, which eventually led out. We'll definitely unravel that. So appreciate you hanging out with us. It's great. Thanks you guys for hosting us. This is fantastic. This is awesome.
Shout out to the Mission Church, Rich, and Bradley over here helping us all the time.
Yeah. And definitely just being here in Utah, you kind of have that like we're in the hornet's nest. So I love it.
Behind enemy lines.
Yes. All right. So if you guys really enjoyed this episode, go ahead and please share this episode. Talk to your friends. Definitely let everyone know. Leave comments on our social media. And as always, a program like this cannot continue without your support. So if you want to consider partnering with us so we can deliver content like this to you on a weekly basis, go to our website, thecultishow.com. You can donate one time or become a monthly partner. Either way, if you choose to do either one, thank you so much. And on that note, we will talk to you guys next week on Cultish, where we talk about Mormonism and ghost hunting.